Good morning. Welcome to the China Future Tech webinar hosted by the South China Morning Post. And today's theme is the US-China chip war and China's chip self-sufficiency progress. I'm Zhou Xin, tech editor at SCMP. This is an extremely important topic, and a lot has been happening on the ground over the past couple of weeks. On one hand, we are witnessing significant progress in China's domestic AI chip development, and also unprecedented investor enthusiasm in some local GPU makers. China's big tech companies from DeepSeek to Tencent have publicly discussing their plan to use local chips. And on the other hand, China is taking a tougher stance against Nvidia. First, there was a public summons of Nvidia executives to address concern about potential backdoor issues. Then come reports advising against purchasing the H20 chips. And now the latest development is, of course, involve a complete rejection of all Nvidia chips. Therefore, it is very good today that we have Gary Wu, the senior economist for Asia Pacific at Natixis Corporate and Investment Banking, who has been following this issue for many years, and Rolf Jennings, our political economy correspondent, who will provide a microeconomic perspective on this issue. In addition, we are also having Ann Cao, our tech reporter who is based in Shanghai, who brings up the latest information on the ground. I would also like to let our readers know that we've launched a special section on SCMP website called China Future Tech. You can use it to find all SCMP coverage of 6 crucial sectors, namely EV, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, robotics, aerospace, and biomedicine. So let's start from Gary. There are lots of things happening on the ground over the last couple of days. And given China's recent pledge to use local GPUs, and also the increasingly toughened stance against Nvidia, is it safe to guess or to say that China has already the confidence or even the capabilities of self-sufficiency in semiconductors? And what are the implications for the broader US-China tech race?
Well, I would say that compared to when the Trade War 1.0 first started, China has definitely become more confident in overcoming this hurdle in semiconductor, especially with all this export control from the US. And I guess one of the key points that we see here is that China is not really looking at the ability to really overcoming or excelling the US in a single chip right now. It is really about putting all the potential technology together that China has access to and trying to match the capability of the US. So if you think of it from that way, definitely China has made some progress. For example, I think Huawei is a very interesting and obvious case in how they try to use the resources of what they have, try to continue to invest in R&D and to develop an ecosystem that can produce certain chips or like a system that can enable this AI development. So definitely, for your first question, China has made quite significant progress. However, when we look at it from the broader basis, right, and that can actually tilt the balance on the geopolitical landscape. Because if you think of how China and the US negotiate, definitely chip is one of the biggest leverage that the US would have on China, and obviously the US is also worried about other supply from China, but that's another story. So I wouldn't be surprised that there will be more DeepSeek movement coming from China in the coming years. There has been one in January. It is really this combination of all this R&D and all the development that we see, which sometimes may not be on the surface, but that's the result that we may see in the next couple of years.
Cool, yeah. So you are from Shanghai, and please tell me what's happening on the ground. And if what Gary said is right, we're going to see more and more DeepSeek moments, and why China is making such rapid progress.
Cool. So I think there's so many big news happening just over the last few weeks or months. So first and foremost, we see Huawei, who have a huge event in Shanghai yesterday and announced its computing cluster, which it claimed to be the most powerful in the world. And also it has a roadmap for its Ascent chips, which is the current focal point of US and China tech war. And so basically it says its Ascent chips will have 940 this year, and 960 is for next 2027 and 2028. So this is very interesting to see because first, Huawei is very high-profile announcement by Huawei because Xu Zhijing, the Huawei strategic chairman, made the announcement himself, and also. This is a very real chance for Huawei to make a public, official announcement of its progress in
Yes, I remember. They haven't released any information about their chip since 2019, right?
Yeah. The last time was also Xu Zhijing, but also he announced the launch of Ascend 910, and so it's 6 years past. And then it's the second time they've made such a high-profile announcement. So that's the most exciting thing for both U.S. and China AI industry. And also the capital market, right? And also, and this timing is very interesting because it comes when Nvidia is in hot water in China. So it is facing antitrust probe into its acquisition of an Israeli company, and also it is facing a inquiry on its whether it has backdoors in its chips, right? And it is also. There's a report says that Chinese government has asked the big tech companies like Alibaba and Tencent not to buy a new China-made chip, China-tailored chip from Nvidia. So someone is guessing whether Huawei is announced this to rival with Nvidia in China market. Well, I think
I guess they are.
Yeah, I think Huawei and not necessarily made announcement just to encounter Nvidia because the conference is an annual conference and it could be planned for a few months, but it just whether it wants or not, it just kind of interesting collides with Nvidia's travel.
Good. Thanks, Anne. So this timing brings me to the next question to Rolf, because it happens just a day before the scheduled phone call between President Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. And also the call is likely to happen in the next 12 hours. So, this chip thing has been a bargaining chip for the Trump administration. And let's hear what the US president has said.
I don't think that Donald Trump is going to have a whole lot to say about Huawei
on chips and
or
semiconductors.
About
but if you're building
chip war
in the
per
United
se, I think Trump perceives this whole chip issue and Huawei's announcement as part of the bigger trade war that he started basically in 2018. And if you look at the United States, if Americans even know what Huawei is, it doesn't have a great reputation. It's been on the entity list of businesses, Chinese firms that don't do business in the US for quite a number of years, I believe. And Trump will just see this thing as like, hey, you're retaliating against something, or you're about to, or you want me to do something for some other issue, and he will see it's not really something that he has to worry about per se, in particular.
So is it okay to conclude that the Trump administration may have lost its Trump card?
I don't think so. I think Trump sees the whole deck as something he can play with, whether the card has his name on it or not. He thinks that every Trump could be a Trump card if he turns it over right. And he could concede something to China, or he could take the Huawei thing in stride and say, well, wait a while, let's wait until this chip is proven, in China at least, and we'll see what we want to do with it at that point.
Very good. So this issue actually is possibly one of the most kind of important issues for the world economy and for supply chain. So we received over 140 questions from our readers and subscribers, and many questions about regional implications for supply chain. So for Gary, there's one question from I guess is a Korean reader, Jason Pa. He asked what China's progress and this chip war development is going to have an impact on East Asia, particularly on South Korea, and also including Taiwan, TSMC, Samsung, SK Hynix. What are the implications for them?
Well, over the past 1 or 2 decades, because of this trend of globalization, also with this rising demand in China, so definitely China has become one of the biggest market in semiconductors. So it has served as a very important revenue source for all these companies like Samsung, SK Hynix, TSMC, in really selling into this market and fit into the R&D. So one big change that we are likely to see is that because if we continue to see this drive of the self-sufficiency in China, at the same time with this export control from the US, which means all these companies will find it very, very difficult to access to the market. It's not only from the US, but if we start to see more domestic alternative in China, probably come at a cheaper option, then definitely that can be a blow to the revenue growth in some of these companies. But of course, we have so far only talked about demand, but on the supply side, if we start to see this supply chain development evolving into something more concrete, then at a certain stage it's possible for some of these Chinese firms along the semiconductor chains will be able to have the capability to compete with some of the other companies from other economy. So I would say there will be quite a significant implication on both the demand and supply side. And for all these other companies, of course, they will want to still keep a certain business in China, but at the same time, how can they actually tap on into different market will be a very important one, because it's not only about losing access to the Chinese market. Yesterday, we also have this inject of capital from Nvidia to Intel.
Yes.
If the US also do the same, then, well, where can they sell the chips to?
Yeah, exactly. And then there are also lots of questions from third-party countries, like you're from a European institution. There's a reader, Erwin de Bastia, is asking like, what Europe should do. When the two elephants are fighting against each other, and should Europe develop its own chip supply chain, or should Europeans just choose one?
Well, I would say the problem that Europe face may be slightly different from what we have talked about from South Korea or maybe other places in Asia like Japan and Taiwan. Because in Europe, the competitive advantage is pretty much on the equipment side. So the major channel that got hit is probably through ASML, which is a very important semiconductor equipment making company, which fit into all this production of Samsung, TSMC, etc. So we, of course, have heard news about China trying to overcome this hurdle in developing further into this machinery. So far, there has been, compared to other area, rather minor process, but we cannot rule out the chance that one day China can actually do that. And also, the US restriction will likely to remain tight, so which means Europe will kind of lose access to the Chinese market as well. But having said that, I do think in Europe, there's always that sense of security, that if you cannot really guarantee the supply from China, maybe because of the quality and both quantity, and who knows whether the US will also restrict the export to a certain extent, then I think it makes sense to build a certain level of supply chain, at least as a minimum level for security in Europe, which is happening right now. But the difference between Europe versus the US or maybe China is that Europe seems to be quite welcome in allowing other companies to build factories in Europe to guarantee the supply in Europe, not necessarily produced by European companies.
Yeah, that's another strategy, yes. So Rolf, what's the general take of this trade war between the US and China? Because this is big in China, but how's the reactions in the United States? I mean, there are lots of politicians saying like we have to gain the leadership, etc. We have to win the AI race. And how's the general perception about this tech competition?
So from what I can tell, and I was back there in July and August, so most Americans aren't really concerned about it. They think they have an advantage in chip technology and other types of consumer technology. It's true that the government of the United States doesn't have a programmatic way of supporting the chip sector, although both the Biden administration and the current Trump administration have pledged some pretty key support for it. But traditionally, the Silicon Valley market is taking care of itself. There's a DIY culture, a lot of private venture capital. The supply chain evolves on its own. The companies there have a global recognition. So we have Apple, we have Google, you can name a few others. There's no reason for Americans to think that they'll lose their recognition for quality in different countries around the world. If there were to be a problem, perhaps they think the market would take care of it, and we can see from the dot-com bubble and the burst in 2000, 2001, that this does happen sometimes, and it could happen again with AI. There are some early signs that some of the investments in AI aren't paying back the way they should. So if that happens, then I think the venture capital, the funds will say, hey, wait, this isn't working out. And then the Americans will take it more seriously.
Okay. Yeah, this kind of confidence is also reflected in many of the questions, actually. Like, we're always talking about China making progress. But for Anne, this question is for you. Like, still there are many concerns, like, really, whether Huawei can, make it into reality. They have announced a big plan, yes, for sure. But, can you really do it without these ASML machines, without these systems from the, US companies? So there are still lots of concerns about whether China can really do it, without reliance on any of the imported technologies.
Yeah, I think Huawei do need to, from my perspective, Huawei do need to worry about two things in the future. And the first is whether it can bring Huawei and also its manufacturer SMIC, China's largest chip foundry, can bring their process nodes from 7 nanometers to 5 nanometers, and that's a key choke point for Huawei now. Because Huawei, the last time that Huawei has surprised the world with its process nodes is when it unveiled its Mate 60 series, when it used a 7 nanometer Kirin chip in its handset, and which is most of the world didn't expect Huawei to achieve this because it was put on the US sanction entity list since 2019. And then it was also banned from doing business with TSMC, the world's largest chip foundry in Taiwan. So it made such progress in 6 years ago. And then a latest report, third-party report, shows that Huawei is still using 7 nanometer chips in its laptop. So while some of them would expect at least you should make some progress over the past 6 years, but it didn't from the current third-party findings. So that's one major thing that Huawei need to worry about. And I think the underlying reason is that China still lacks the ability to make advanced EUV machines, which is used for the most advanced processors used in AI processors or used in mobile smartphones.
Okay.
Yeah. And
but are these problems can be overcome by some technical improvement? For instance, if you don't have the 5 nanometer or even 2 nanometer, but at least through computing technologies, all these things can be put together and still achieving the same computing power for AI models, training and inference?
Yeah, I believe that is what is Huawei working on, because it also unveiled the super cluster, which use up to 1 million GPU, it calls neural processing units, NPUs, in its cluster. So I think Huawei's method is to put as many chips as possible in its AI data centers, as opposed to improve the performance of a single chip, which is like Nvidia is trying to do. So this is a software engineering effort made by Huawei. So from my perspective, or from the perspective of some tech experts, it can be help narrow the gap between Huawei and Nvidia's chip performance. But still, it's not fully substitution for Nvidia chips in the long run.
Yeah. So Gary, there's one question saying, apart from the sanctions from Zhou Xin, so what are the biggest kind of obstacle for China to achieve totally, self-sufficiency in the supply chain?
Well, definitely sanction is one of the biggest problem that China has, but I really like this question because that's what people only talk about.
Yes.
So I guess beyond sanction, there's a few things that China will find it difficult to overcome. First is that China is right now in a catching up process, so it's more like you are running a marathon. Your competitor is a few kilometers in front of you, but you actually need to run quicker. So I think time is indeed quite a big enemy for China. And if you look at the semiconductor industry, of course there's a lot of secret within how to really produce the chip in the best way. But the technology itself is not something that is a secret. China can try to do it, but it's really a very long process of the trial and error. So how China can cope with that, I think that will be a very important challenge. And second, because of all these companies that they are already advanced and running in front of China, then there will be a lot of hurdles of intellectual properties that China will need to find ways to do the same thing, but not to hurt that. But of course, we are talking about like a scenario that everyone is working with business ethics. If no one cares about IP, then obviously you can try to copy what others is doing. And lastly, it's also about the cost. Initially, because of this very heavy R&D investment on whether like some of these Chinese chip makers can really produce all these chips in a very cost-effective way and apply it to at least the Chinese ecosystem. I would say these are all the very, very important factors. And lastly, I do think that compared to many other countries in the world, they still have quite a large room to really have this development in the talent as well. So I would say all of these are equally important beyond the sanction.
Yeah, Gary, I have a follow-up question on the cost issue, because this has been debated in China as well. So some people would say like China is basically sacrificing economic efficiency for security. Okay, and even Jason Huang personally was saying like, even the China chips are free, the cost of running these systems will still be more expensive than using the available Nvidia ones. So if this continues from the economist point of view, what kind of consequences? Is China really paying a too high price for this so-called self-sufficiency?
Well, I would say there is a price justifying why all these Nvidia chips are more expensive, because it's simply better performing, the quality is better, it's easier to, you just buy it and train your AI model. But if that is not available, then I don't think that's really a choice for China to make, except trying to produce something at a similar level, or you find very creative ways to trying to achieve the same outcome for AI. So also it's not only about the chip computing power itself, there's also a range of factors of, for example, electricity, or how do you integrate that into the whole ecosystem. It's not only about the chip itself. So I would say that is probably a feasible but costly option that China will need to take in the short run, simply because if China doesn't do it this way, then we're not only talking about the chips, but it's really about this broader AI race in whether China will be running slower than the US.
And China is very proud that it has possibly the world's best, most powerful electricity system, right? So if you are building up something, a power center, computing center in somewhere else, possibly you need to build a new power plant. But for China, just need one plug. So you think like China's infrastructure is really a great advantage for China to develop its own system?
Well, yes, indeed, because if you look at first the market size and also the supply of electricity, also the general application field, right? US and China are pretty much the two largest single market, which are excel in that. So with this long development in China in manufacturing, then definitely the electricity supply is probably better than some of the other competitors. Let's think of India or maybe other ASEAN countries as well. So definitely I think this is a plus. But having said that, how fast China can move towards the more renewable side, I think that is probably another question to address. But in terms of stability, I don't see any problem of China having that stable electricity supply.
Yeah. Okay, this is a two-way street, Ralph. So now question is for you, because now we're talking about like China's paying the price, but now increasingly like there are more voices. Is the United States paying a price for trying to, putting this small yard, high fence tech restrictions in China? Is all these measures like creating a very, very powerful competitor down the road? Or in fact, the competitor is already emerging?
I don't think the American politicians or the American public really see it that way. For one thing, as we mentioned before, they have a lot of very strong companies in the IT space. They're globally known firms. And the Americans figure those are going to keep taking the world by storm, and they're not too worried about China. China, on the other hand, is in a bit of an economic slump, if you want to call it that, and there's a perception that there isn't enough private investment in the space. The innovations might not have the quality that you require, as you're suggesting, to run some of these really good AI systems.
But these are proven to be wrong perceptions, right? Because DeepSeek and also Huawei has proved again and again these perceptions are possibly biased, or at least a little bit like overconfident. So are there any latest kind of reaction to this?
I think in the tech community, people would say in America, let's wait for the rollout. Let's wait for the chip cluster to take effect. We'll see how it works. And China does have the advantage of deployment. They have their own the e-commerce systems and e-payment systems, electric vehicles. They have a sympathetic market outside of China, in the Middle East, Russia, Southeast Asia. They can deploy this stuff, even if their own economy isn't doing well. But we need to wait and see how it works.
Cool. So, and please tell us, like, how far China is still behind the United States in terms of semiconductor and chip? Yeah.
In terms of semiconductors, I think we need to bring in two different aspects.
Yes.
So in terms of legacy chips, which is mostly larger than 28 nanometers, I think we have enough confidence to say we are good enough to make our own mature node
Oh, that's
chips.
exactly why China has launched anti-dumping investigations into
Yeah.
United States legacy chips. Yeah.
Right, so we're confident enough in this field, but in terms of the leading edge chips, which is smaller than 14 nanometers, so I think it's more than 5 years, or at least one generation behind, as both Jason Huang and Ren Zhenfei have said. So, let us take TSMC and Samsung's process as an example. So both fabs are able to achieve 7 nanometers back in 2018 or 2019, and then 7 years later, they're able to they're advancing to 2 nanometers from 3 nanometers, while Huawei is still doing the 7 nanometers. So I think it's at least several years in terms of the chip process nodes. Yeah, but we are able to like shorten the gap through what we have said before, the engineering method. So China is making making efforts in trying to kind of forming an alliance between chip companies like major GPU companies like Cambricon and also MetaX and also Biren. These companies are trying to join forces with each other. So an AI developer are able to use chips from different companies, but they are trying to improve the efficiency using different chips as opposed to using just Nvidia, because Nvidia has very strong software ecosystem called CUDA. But we don't have a very strong rival with the CUDA at this moment.
How about Huawei's CAN?
Yeah, it is a very have very high hope in the future. Yeah, but currently I think it's still not strong enough to match Nvidia's.
Okay, yeah. Even for we are covering, I mean, day-to-day basis, Gary and Ralph, you can address this question. And it's still fascinating to see how the table has turned. A few months ago, it's basically the perception is like China wants to buy Nvidia chips, whatever it is, H20, and so Nvidia has to, Jason Huang has to lobby in Washington, and finally he got the good news in the flight to Beijing and announced it to the whole world that now I can sell H20 to you guys. And then a few weeks later, China said, no, we do not want your H20 chips, or you can sell your best products or nothing. So how does this actually, happen? And many people are taking this. Maybe this is a negotiation tactics. The eventual purpose of China is still to get the best chips from Nvidia. So how do you take this kind of theory? Of course, so there's no evidence to support these kind of theories yet.
Well, I would say at the current stage, to me, it's more negotiation tactics. And I think, as we have talked about today, I don't think China really have that capability and the capacity to produce all the chips that it needs for the AI development right now. So right now, the options is you have all these other creative solutions developed locally that seems to be working, but on a smaller scale. At the same time, there's still a very big reliance on import of chips. Let's not forget, semiconductor is actually a bigger import item than oil in China since many years ago. So definitely, I think that reliance is still there. But having said that, how to really buy time to develop its own industry, at the same time also get more from the US, but not at this probably disadvantaged products. I think this is probably the goal that China is aiming right now. So yes, I think it's more about this conversation between Xi and Trump. I'm sure they will have that on the table when they next meet or talk.
So Ralph, how's your take on that? Is it possible for Nvidia, maybe one day they will sell their most advanced Blackwell systems to China to compete directly against Huawei, because they know that H20 is no longer wanted in the China market?
I think Nvidia's it's an experienced company. They've done many sales. They know what they're doing technologically and as a business. And I think that throughout this year to date, they sort of priced out the China market. They understood that Donald Trump didn't want them to sell things there up until July, when they had to agree to pay 15% of their revenue to the US. And then a couple months later, they're not allowed to sell anything in China. I don't think that Jensen Huang really did a double take, even though he kind of pretended to. They understand that they would like to sell their more advanced chips to China. But if they don't have that chance, they'll sell them in the US and to the Western supply chain and just kind of get on with things.
So broadly speaking, Gary, if US and China have two different kind of ecosystems, China with its own Huawei and DeepSeek, and then of course the US has Nvidia and all these AI systems. Will this be a huge kind of economic cost for the whole world?
Well, I would say so. And of course, if you think of it from three perspectives, China, US, and the rest of the world, then obviously China is probably heading towards where it wants to. This is basically started from 2015, manufacturing 2025. Maybe some other factors has pushed it a little bit faster, but indeed it's moving towards that self-sufficiency direction. For the US, well, decoupling with China is happening. All this strong support for the domestic industry, attracting companies there, producing there for the US market. This is also happening. Then for the rest of the world, it is really being pulled apart between these two big economies. So of course, there will still be, let's say, strong demand from Europe or maybe ASEAN for other purposes. But I think for the rest of the world, it is pretty much about all these companies. They will need to, they will probably being teared apart by these two markets and not able to access it as easier as before. So I would say this will be the biggest cost that I see right now. In the short run, it really depends on what are the tolls on all this export control, etc. But in the long run, I think eventually if we start to see more companies from the US and China both doing better than the rest of the world, then obviously all these companies may bear cost.
Okay, so from our readers, one particular question, Ralph, is about Taiwan, and of course, the company often appeared is TSMC. Like how this is going to affect TSMC? For now, of course, TSMC seems to have no problem. It just has one factory in Nanjing on the mainland, and with its new plant in Arizona, etc. And how this U.S. chip war is going to affect TSMC?
I think the war has already affected it in several ways. For one thing, the whole Trump tariff agenda has prompted TSMC to invest more and more and more in the United States because Trump has a policy of onshoring. And of course that means that the Silicon Valley giants will be able to purchase chips from TSMC. TSMC is also, I believe, working on plants in Japan and Germany. And so you can kind of tell they have a Western aligned supply chain bias at this point in their business strategy. The US restrictions against selling to China are quite strict, and TSMC has grappled with those over the years. And I think for now they see the Western supply chain, particularly the US, as a large market, and they really need to focus on that. That being said, they'd love to sell into China. That's really, they have done it before. They want to keep doing it, so if there's a way they can legally, they will go back to doing that.
Okay. So, and from the ground, of course, we are also talking a lot about SMIC, because SMIC is really crucial with the Huawei's ambitious goals can be achieved. So, how's the progress at SMIC, its processing technologies? Some will say it already has started using, DUVs from local suppliers so that it can pull it off, and some will say like maybe it will always fall behind, several generations behind, because they don't have the machine from ASML. Yeah.
Right. I think in the short term, lithography machines will remain as a major headache for SMIC because it is currently I think there's no way to bypass EUV in advanced chip making. So and ASML is currently the only provider of EUV in the world. But SMIC is making progress. It is reportedly trialing a new DUV machine, as you mentioned, which is able to achieve 7 or 5 nanometers currently. So that is very hopeful if they can able to put that machine into commercialization, especially the manufacturing of Huawei chips. Yeah, and also I think Huawei is also pushing forward the equipment effort itself. It has a Shenzhen-based startup called Sicario, which is believed to have a strong tie with Huawei. So the company always remain quite kind of secretly development over the past few years. But earlier this year, in March, it attended a trade show in Shanghai and have a large exhibition of all its products. And I talked to the staff at the booth when I was joining that event, and the member told me some of its chip making tools were able to achieve 5 nanometers.
Okay.
But also, they did not mention they are making lithography machines. They said it's like etching tools or other thing, film deposition tools, but they have patent in lithography machines.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's another question is about called quality ratio, right?
Yeah.
Yes, maybe you can produce 5 nanometers.
Yeah.
But will that be what's a reasonable estimate of the quality ratio? I see lots of reports. Some say 20%, some say 60%, and some say already 80%. So what's a more reasonable estimate of the quality ratio?
I think for quality ratio, it depends on it also depends on whether you're using Nvidia chips or just chips from different domestic companies. So if you use domestic companies, the quality ratio, or we call it yield, could be low. And also you use more power, the power consumption will be higher. Yeah, so I'm not professionally confident to give an expectation of quality ratio, but I think that will remain a major concern for the.
I understand. Yes, that's one of the most important unanswered questions about the semiconductor. But tell me more broadly. I mean, apart from Huawei, we're also seeing loads of other local GPU makers emerging. Say, the hottest stock in Shanghai now is the Cambricon, which is created by the genius two brothers. And then we are also having Biren, which is likely to, there are reports that it's applying for an IPO in Hong Kong, and there are several others. So tell us the local market kind of dynamics. Is Huawei the dominant one, surrounded by a bunch of smaller players, or it's become a more seriously competitive market?
Yeah, I've talked to a few Shanghai AI developers when I was covering some events in Shanghai, and I think their overall attitude is they have more confidence in Huawei over other domestic GPU companies because ecosystem is so important in chip making. So Huawei have its CAN, infrastructure, so it's able to.
Yeah, they promised to open source it by the end of this year.
Yeah, Huawei is making that effort. So it's able to help improve the not only performance but also power consumption and also processing speed of the chips. So I think people AI developers tend to prefer Huawei because it has a great ecosystem. But as long as I think domestic makers like Capricorn or Biren or MetaX, they can join forces with each other and trying to improve the efficiency of their chips, they could be quite also very reliable sources of chips for the AI developers.
Good. And also Gary, this is for you because for the chip war, when DeepSeek coming out, the share price of Nvidia plunged. But now it seems increasingly accepted that the U.S. chip makers or AI companies, they can afford to have no access to the Chinese market. Is that so? Because yesterday, of course, thanks to the Intel deal, Nvidia's stock price was up 3.5% just a few hours after Huawei saying we are going to take on you. Yeah.
Well, I would say that the world pretty much still look at Nvidia as one of the most prestige source as the AI chip. So with all this demand around the world, then I think this is pretty much what the market focus right now. But of course, some of the worries that the market had before doesn't mean it will disappear because if China is able really to achieve the same result with a cheaper cost, then first I would say it's not only about Nvidia losing the access to China market. This is no longer the biggest worry. It's really about whether there's other options around the world that can actually reduce this global demand that Nvidia may have. So I guess for now, we are not really fully there yet. DeepSeek is one moment that showed that, okay, maybe there are alternative pathway, maybe all these resources that the world deployed to AI doesn't need to be as much as before for the same result. But I guess right now, it is really about whether China can develop something that can massively reduce this Nvidia demand globally. I guess the world pretty much accept the fact that, well, maybe Nvidia cannot sell to China anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there are lots of Ralph. There's lots of interesting comments from our questions and comments from our readers. And this one is almost directly question, say, why the US are not able to comprehend that China's tech capability will get further and further with or without the US technologies. And is, the tech sector in the United States is worrying that China could become not only the China market but also globally. It's becoming a very, very important alternative, particularly in markets like Asia, Africa, all these Belt and Road countries, etc.
I'm not sure. Again, kind of going back to some earlier points, that the American political system, the politicians, the president, Congress, and then the American public and the tech sector, I don't think that they're looking at China and Chinese chips as being a race. We can talk about the 7-year margin or the 5-year margin, but where will the US be in 5 or 7 years? Will they have a 1.6 processing node? And then does China need to catch up to that? And why do we need to catch up? If we actually do have a bifurcated supply chain around the world, then the US will be selling presumably to Western aligned markets, which are fairly wealthy at this point compared to, let's say, Southeast Asia and some of the countries in Africa that you mentioned. So I'm not sure that there's really a perception that there's a race, and that term may have been cast more by pundits and other people in Asia rather than by Americans.
Okay.
But I think that the politicians who, whether they're short-sighted or not, they're looking at China as being a more of a strategic threat to the United States, and chips are just part of this broader trade war. If you look at the bigger news this week might be soybeans instead of chips.
Okay.
And that seems to be more of a threat to the
if
common
you
American.
read AI action plan from the White House, apparently they include special language or terms to say we have to promote the American standards of the future technology to the rest of the world. And this apparently is targeting at Chinese tech standards, etc., right?
It could be. A lot of these things that come out of the government don't mention countries by name, but it could be. And I think a lot of it, we haven't brought up India in this conversation yet, but India.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up
okay, I won't preempt you, but I was just thinking that we talked about the South Korean firms, we talked about TSMC. I think they're looking at India because they have the talent, they have some government investment, they have some fabrication plants already, obviously a huge population. They're going somewhere.
Yeah. So, Gary, do you agree that India can be, that US-led kind of supply chain, India can replace China's role?
Well, I think it really depends on what kind of product it is, and maybe for iPhones or for certain manufacturing sectors, then the answer is yes, because you cannot really find a country that is as big as China with a similar size of population, so that is true. But in terms of AI and semiconductor, it really depends on whether India can also deliver this nice infrastructure that enable that to happen, because we all know that the red tapes in India is not that easy to navigate. All these rules on land, and then all the complex geopolitical issue that we see right now. So it is one of the options, but whether it can really fully replace China in this sense, I think there is still some room for debate. But having said that, I think going back to the question related to the US, I think one difference between China and US companies is that in the US there are many AI companies that tends to be quite international. You can think of Microsoft or Google, etc. They are actually building data centers around the world, so naturally that will help selling US or related chips towards the rest of the world in capturing that market. Versus if you look at some of the big player in China, let's say Tencent, Alibaba, well, a large part is still domestic focused. They're trying to expand overseas, but it's still not at the same scale if we think of all this US firm. US firm is probably one of the group of companies that are most internationalized.
Yes. So this leads to my next question, because we have reports. I mean, we have interviews with Hong Kong executives here, and they're talking about Hong Kong has starting to try to test some local GPUs, because previously it's exclusively Nvidia, and this apparently you can show that with production capacity improving at home, there are loads of kind of enthusiasm or the demand to sell Chinese GPUs to other countries. And in countries like Malaysia, we have this case they claim they use Huawei server and then backtrack and saying that they're not actually using these GPUs. So if we are in a long horizon, which country is going to take a lion's share in the global kind of chip market?
Well, I would say that it's still the US related supply chain, because if you look at the global semiconductor technology right now, a lot of this technology is very US centric, because the modern technology is really first developed in the US, and then there's multiple era of outsourcing towards maybe Japan and then South Korea, Taiwan, etc. So I think with that in mind, then it's pretty much together with this connection of US companies. So if they are allowed to sell, then obviously the natural market of Europe or the Western Alliance, or in Asia, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, I think those will all be the important customer, or at least form the very important part of the US centric supply chain. But even for some of the other market like Middle East, and we all know that even though they may be more open to having different options, but back in the days that when Trump visited those countries, they have announced a very big deal on building data centers and then buying Nvidia chips, etc. So
now it's UK, like there's
Yes.
7-day investment pledges in UK. Yeah.
yes, exactly. So I would say that the US related chips will still be the central option. But having said that, whether China can produce certain chips at a cheaper cost for other countries, I think that will be something that we need to observe. So far, China definitely doesn't have really the quantity to supply that yet, but we will see.
Fair enough. Yeah. And you are from Shanghai, so I heard Huawei has built a massive campus in the outskirts of Shanghai, right?
Yeah.
And this is going to become the beating heart for China's semiconductor kind of ambition. And Ren Zhengfei was the founder of Huawei, is personally saying, like, making the whole campus look like Geneva, and like everywhere there's a cafe and there's a lake in the middle, and there are all the massive European-style buildings. So tell me something like, what's the significance of these kind of like parks?
Yeah, it is a huge park in the suburb area of Shanghai. Yeah, and it's just started to use recently, not for many long time. So, but I think it will be a very key hub for China's semiconductor drive. And also because Huawei's semiconductor design unit is called High Silicon, and it has a unit in Shanghai which is responsible for making customized chip solutions for external clients. So I think the Qingpu Park, which is a huge one, should be able to be like a hub for Huawei to, especially its Shanghai's High Silicon unit. Yeah.
So let me ask you kind of concluding questions. 6 years ago or 5 years ago, and then the U.S. starting to sanction Huawei, and everyone saying like maybe China's chip ambition is finished. It cannot develop. The small yard, high fence strategy is playing effect. But like 5 or 6 years later, now we are saying, basically China has made it, has defied these kind of restrictions. So can we safely say that, at least for now, for China, you don't have to worry about these so-called choking restrictions at this moment, starting from Anne, maybe?
Well, okay. I think it's not completely relief, but it's a big sigh of relief, because we have the Huawei latest new products, and we also have many efforts in both software ecosystem around the AI centers, but also we have equipment in chip making tools. So we are trying to catching up with the US at full speed. Yeah, but still, because we lack the ability to make EUV machines, so I think that's a headache in the coming years.
Okay, Gary, is EUV the only kind of thing that we should worry about?
Well, I would say it's still quite problematic, and I mean, of course, compared to 5 years ago, China is definitely, as we mentioned at the beginning, more confident in at least securing certain supply domestically for domestic usage. So when we talk about self-sufficiency, China has made some progress. But having said that, whether China will be able to export to the rest of the world, I think that is definitely a very different question. So I agree that the bottleneck of EUV is indeed quite severe. But I think one problem we look at here is that if the US or the rest of the world is able to use more advanced chips to enhance this AI capability, and China is still probably stuck in solving one hurdle, that gap has a chance of widening in terms of the AI computing power. So even though China would be able to increase the quantity for domestic usage, then I'm not too sure without any breakthrough that can really help China in also exporting all this capacity towards the world. So I would say it's still worrisome. Some progress is made, but not a full game changer yet.
Not a full game changer. Yeah. So, Ralph, do you see any possibility like the U.S. may change its strategy after seeing the progress in the last 5 or 6 years?
I don't think the U.S. needs to change its strategy. They probably, to be a better global citizen, they could, they should, but they don't have to economically or technologically. They'll be watching China, and they'll be watching China, I think, more and more for organic things that it can or can't do, since we have so many restrictions in place. So if China can make it or not comes down to what they can really do or what they can't do. So we'll see how much they can do in terms of lithography, like actually making chips, also packaging them to put into devices. There may be some hurdles there. We have a growing but slowly growing economy compared to the past, which means you don't have as much private investment, fewer startups.
But if you take stock invested money and the private investment, there's huge amounts of money following these projects.
Yeah, I think sure we have it. That I think from my understanding is that these companies in China rely largely on government support, and the government is kind of steering the direction of who develops how. And yes, you do have your DeepSeek moments.
Yes.
And we'll see more of those. And you never know. The tech world operates on surprise. So we don't know. In terms of the rest of the world, we'll probably see a slow uptake in some of China's better friends, better in terms of political relations, also physical geographic proximity, parts of Southeast Asia that are still developing. Indonesia, for example, they'll probably be willing to give it a shot, especially if they get a discount, if the costs aren't as high. If it doesn't work for them, well, they're better off than they were, and they're still friends with China. And I think the restrictions from the U.S. will probably have a slowing effect on China's development, but it won't stop them from pursuing self-sufficiency for sure, and then maybe a race with the U.S. in the longer term.
That's well said. I mean, there's so many known unknowns and making the process of watching the tech risk even more interesting. So this brings an end to today's webinar, and thanks all for staying with us. For SCMP readers who are interested in China tech, please once again be reminded to follow the China Future Tech section on our website to find the stories on EV, AI, semiconductors, robotics, aerospace, and biotech. And for those who would like more than the usual SCMP content, please also subscribe to SCMP Plus, a feature product that provides insights and in-depth analysis of news stories. On that note, a briefing about China's chip industry has been released exclusively on SCP Plus, which is our premier subscription for business leaders and China watchers. As a special offer, we are providing an exclusive preview of the report to the viewers of this webinar. Feel free to scan the QR code on the screen to access it. And once again, thank you for watching, and see you next time.